CarolinaPrepper.com. If you're looking for quality food storage for hiking, fishing, hunting, basic survival needs, or just for everyday use, check out our food storage line at CarolinaPrepper.com. We also carry other fine quality products, such as our can-can concealment holsters for men and women. Keeping your firearm under cover and within reach puts confidence in your hands in any situation. Our products are 100% American-made. Check us out today at CarolinaPrepper.com.
And now, it's time to Stand for Truth with the host of Stand for Truth Radio, Susan Knowles.
And welcome to the program, everyone. I am your host, Susan Knowles. I'm so glad that you could join us today. Please check out my website at SUSANKNOWLES.com, and don't forget to follow Stand for Truth Radio with a variety of shows that I do, such as Knowles on the News and God's Views on Political News with my co-host Bill Cloud. To hear all of our podcasts, just go to Spreaker.com or download the Spreaker phone app and type in Stand for Truth Radio with Susan Knowles. All the shows can also be heard on iHeartRadio. Now, the easiest way to find those shows, just go to SusanKnowles.com, click on the big iHeartRadio logo. It'll take you right there. And finally, follow me on Twitter at Susan Knowles. Now, my guest today is Dave T. Hardy, author of the book, I'm from the Government and I'm Here to Kill You, The True Human Cost of Official Negligence. Hardy has practiced law since 1975. He was born in Phoenix to an old line Arizona family. His great-grandfather was Nat Hickman, a gunslinging outlaw who took the alias of Charles W. Hardy when he fled to the Arizona Territory in 1872. Hardy served as associate editor of the Arizona Law Review and was on the moot court team, which took first place in the regional competition and competed at the Nationals in New York City. He was also on the team which won the statewide American College of Trial Lawyers competition for best jury argument. Since then, he has handled cases up to the U.S. Supreme Court and won a death penalty appeal in the Arizona Supreme Court. From 1982 to 1992, he worked in Washington at the Office of the Solicitor, U.S. Department of the Interior, mostly representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Hardy has 5 books and 13 law review articles in print, and one of the articles has been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court and 11 of the 13 U.S. Supreme Courts of Appeals. So let's welcome to the show Dave Hardy. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Oh, very good. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you could be with us today. I want to let you know I read your book, really enjoyed it. If you can enjoy something where you find out the government is trying to kill you in so many ways, but it was really a great and informative book.
Oh, thank you. And it took long enough to write, but I hope I got it together well.
No, you did, and I want to talk about some of these cases because I think some of us are familiar with some of the cases. We may not know all the facts about it, but you talk about one of the first big cases ever to involve the government, and you talked about it involved fertilizer. Talk about that case and tell us what that was about.
Oh, sure. Well, that's the first chapter in I'm from the Government and I'm Here to Kill You. And it deals with the Texas City explosion of 1947. Essentially, at the end of World War II, we needed a lot of fertilizer to be shipped to Europe under the Marshall Plan. And some genius realized that during World War II, we produced a whole lot of sensitized ammonium nitrate as an explosive. It was particularly popular with the filling for aircraft bombs. And he realized that this would probably make good fertilizer. So they produced it and just relabeled it. Instead of explosive in a red label with all the safety precautions you had to take, they just labeled it fertilizer. And the word came from the munitions plants that we're making this in too great a haste. It's too hot when it comes out. This is dangerous. This stuff could catch fire. And they were told, no, maintain production. Do not slow down. Well, in Texas City, a port city, they had about a ship loaded with 2,300 tons of the stuff. It was a 2,300-ton bomb, and it caught fire. Nobody had been warned this was explosive. They thought it was just ordinary fertilizer. The bags had caught on fire or something. So lots of people went down to the docks to watch the fire. The firemen got on board the ship, and the ship blew up. It destroyed about a third of the city, killed upwards of 600 people. I mean, they never got a complete body count because large portions of the population around there were simply fragmented. And then it set fire to another ship, and that one blew up. What they had left as fertilizer that hadn't been loaded on the ships, they sent to another port and sent it to France, and it made it all the way to France, and it blew up. At that point, they finally figured out this wasn't safe. The people involved, the victims, sued the United States government for negligence and wrongful death. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, which said, you have no suit. This is under the statute allowing suit, this is a discretionary act. And it was a discretionary act to make the explosive, it was a discretionary act to make it in a dangerous manner, and it was a discretionary act to ship it through your town. So basically, you got killed, but you have no remedy at all.
And I can only imagine what those people were thinking. How can this possibly be? You lost your family, everybody that worked there on the ship, and the ship blew up and everything else. The town practically burns down, and nothing happens.
Yes, exactly. One of the themes I developed in the book is what would have happened if this was a private corporation? If, say, Dow Chemical had decided to ship a bunch of extremely dangerous explosive and label it fertilizer and blow up half a town. I'd say the entire board of directors would be under criminal indictment, and the company would be ruined financially. And I don't see there would be much wrong with that. But because it was the government, they were free to do it and walk away.
You also talk about in your book, I'm from the Government and I'm Here to Kill You, about an atomic testing. And can you talk to us about, you labeled it Dirty Harry, and explain to us what that was all about? Well,
there was extensive testing in the 1950s, early 60s at a site, open-air site near Las Vegas, where they just set off atomic bombs and studied them. Dirty Harry was the dirtiest blast of all. It came at it was set up on a metal tripod of sorts. And so when it blew up near the ground, it sucked in a bunch of the desert soil, irradiated it, turned it into fallout, and then deposited it on ranches mostly across southern Utah, although traces were found as far as the East Coast. I mean, people were getting radiation burns. If you can imagine getting a third-degree radiation burn off dust settling on your skin, they were having their hair fall out. Cancer rates were skyrocketing. And we needed to do nuclear testing. But the people were deliberately misled by the government. They were told this is perfectly safe. Don't worry about it. If anything happens, it would be dangerous. We will warn you. And you could show the government officials knew that it was dangerous and that they refused to warn because they were afraid that that would lead to opposition to their program. And again, they sued. It went to a court of appeals, and the court of appeals held you have no right to sue the government. Even though it lied to you, even though it misled you, even though after the stuff was known to be dangerous, it covered it up, down to officials forging documents over somebody else's signature, claiming that there was no problem. So,
Wow.
That was the second chapter, and it illustrates the government could do as it wanted.
And
the courts...
the courts didn't do anything about it. They had no power to do anything about it.
Yeah, that was their ultimate conclusion, that the government is protected by sovereign immunity, and it hasn't given permission for you to sue it.
And what happened to a lot of the animals in the area as well as the people?
Oh, they showed up, the animals, especially sheep herds, showed up signs before the people did. I mean, we're talking wool falling out, a large proportion of deaths among the young lambs and the nursing mothers. And they were the first to sue, and the government covered up all of the stuff, including covering up one of its own studies that said this shaper plane was suffering from radiation burns, and it claimed that, oh no, it was a lousy rainfall that year, and they probably just starved out.
And you also talk about omnipotent peons. Do you remember that? What was that about?
Oh, well, at Interior, sometimes we call ourselves omnipotent peons. The idea is this. Officially, the decisions are made by the Secretary of the Interior or other in high position. In practice, the people in high position don't know what's going on. I mean, Interior had 70,000 employees. No one could know what was going on. All that they knew was what we peons, omnipotent peons, chose to tell them. So if we filtered out all the bad news, they never heard about it. If we told them, here are 3 options, of course, I've written in such a way that one of them is the one I want you to pick and the other 2 are absolutely lousy, there's nobody to tell them, oh, there's other ways to do it. So in the end, the whole establishment is actually controlled by the peons. And we had almost total power if we knew how to use it correctly, and generally we did.
And who finally blew the whistle on that whole thing?
The nuclear testing was a slow process. It was a reporter, mainly, who just happened to start studying the relationship between cancer outbreaks in southern Utah and the testing thing. And he wrote some articles on it. And a biologist who was in charge of radiation studies in Utah thought the articles were probably bunkum. So he did his own study and came to the conclusion, no, the guy's entirely right. There is a skyrocketing incidence of cancer in the areas that were downrange from the testing area. And I should add, the test dirty area alone contributed nearly as much fallout as the explosion of the reactor at Chernobyl. And that was just one test out of dozens. So we were talking an enormous amount of radiation being deposited.
So there could have been a really long-term, long-lasting impact that the government had absolutely no liability for people that were dying 20 and 30 years later, perhaps, from things that had happened due to the fallout from that day. Yeah.
And the government not just failed to do anything about it, it actively misled the people. Told them, you will be warned if anything is likely to be dangerous. And after it happened, went out of its way to cover everything up. We're not liable. That never happened. Here's a man's report saying, safety precautions were perfectly good. Unfortunately, that's not really a signature. Somebody else forged a fake report.
God, just so amazing. And, when you said a reporter is the one who blew the whistle. I mean, it's too bad that we don't have a lot of reporters like that today, because it seems like today they're just sort of repeating other people's news or not really getting to the bottom of things. And, I mean, those days seem to be over for most reporters that go out and actually do research and get to the bottom of something like this that's happening, because I would have to guess that it's still happening today in some places and in some industries.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's still going on, and the reporters very rarely catch up on it. They don't generally have the time. I mean, most of these investigations would have taken weeks of inquiry.
Yeah.
They too often reproduce a press release. The other thing that I found interesting in the Waco case was all the revelations started to come out. They were heavily carried by a reporter, Lee Hancock, of the Dallas Morning News. But it never got outside the Dallas Morning News. All the stories were bottled up until the day Attorney General Janet Reno announced she'd sent a search team to the FBI SWAT team headquarters and was filing for an independent counsel. Then suddenly it was a nationwide story. What was interesting in it to me was that the story was untouchable until a government official, the Attorney General, endorsed it. New York Times wouldn't carry it. Washington Post wouldn't carry it. Suddenly the Attorney General says, yes, I agree, we have a problem. Now they can carry it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, that whole thing was, and I want to get to that in a minute too, because that one, I think still today people shake their heads and just have a lot of different opinions about what went wrong, what should have been done there. Was any type of lawsuit at all? Did anything come out of what happened there in regards to Dirty Harry and all the nuclear testing?
Yes, there was several lawsuits that were consolidated. In fact, they were handled by part of them was handled by a local attorney, the late Dale Harrelson, here in Tucson. As I recall, they went to on appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the 11th Circuit said, you can't sue the government.
Wow. And you also talk about in your book another incident that was really, it's quite amazing. If you did something like that today, you'd be sued out of existence, even if you were the government, I think. But Tuskegee, Alabama, can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. It started in the 1930s, as I recall. They started out with a study involving rural, entirely black sharecroppers and who had syphilis. And it's unbelievable how widespread syphilis was in the 1920s, 1930s, essentially up to the invention of penicillin. I mean, we're talking 10 or 20% of the U.S. population having it. Well, they started out with these guys, and they would enroll them in the program, and they would get certain benefits like nice meals and a free ride in an automobile, which in 1930s sharecropper, that was an extraordinary thing. And supposedly free medical care. Actually, the medical care, once cures for syphilis became available, the medical care carefully was structured not to include a cure for syphilis, because somebody wanted to study basically what happens when you die of syphilis and how long does it take. I mean, this was stuff worthy of Dr. Mengele, mind you.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
They deliberately blocked it if a person went to a doctor who wasn't in on the know and got a dose of penicillin, that doctor got chewed out for ruining a scientific study. And in fact, what led to the whistleblowing was directly somebody talking about how they'd called out a doctor and chewed him out and threatened him because he told somebody they had a case of syphilis and gave them a shot of penicillin. So that went on for, I think, about 30 years. And it wasn't a secret. It's being written up in medical journals. And only one person wrote the medical journals to protest that this is plainly immoral. Other than that, it was ignored.
I mean, it is amazing when you think about it. This whole group of people who thought that they were coming there to get a cure for syphilis were told this is a cure for syphilis, and you're going to be participating in this, and we're going to be helping you. And all the time, the doctors knew that these people were going to die eventually of syphilis, and they wanted to study, like you said, how long did it take, what did it look like, and what are the symptoms that they were going through, the different stages. I mean, how could people even do such a thing, and not, much less the government doing that? And we know that they did, but I mean, my gosh, it blows the mind.
Yeah, exactly. And the for the last 20 years of the program, it was a matter of the curing syphilis would have been 1 or 2 injections of penicillin, and they made sure they didn't get it so they could study how it destroys the body.
And you have to think that Margaret Sanger and eugenics and everything played a part in them doing that study and felt like they could do that type of thing. I mean, do you think or no?
It probably did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably did. I mean, after all, the progressive movement was, if you or I make decisions, we'll make them stupidly and selfishly, but the wise administrators, the agency people, they will make intelligent, impartial decisions. So if that's going to be the case, why wouldn't the administrators want to gain more information on how syphilis kills you? And if that involves killing a bunch of people, well, hey, you can't make an omelet without scrambling some eggs.
And it just, what better group than a group that volunteers to come there, that you have a captive audience. You don't even have to go looking for people. You just put out a notice, we're going to cure syphilis, and these people, run to you to have that cure, to be thankful for that. It's just apprehensible. Wow.
And they had a ready stock of basically black sharecroppers in the 1930s.
Right.
They didn't know much about medicine. They were illogical. If you wanted a bunch of guinea pigs that you could treat inhumanly, that was your target.
Well, and also, like you said, it was well written about, but nobody knew about it. And these people were under and uneducated. So many of them probably didn't read and didn't have access to different media. So they would be totally blind about what's going on.
Oh, sure. There weren't many subscribers to the New England Journal of Medicine among that population.
Or anybody else, for that matter, in the general population, no doubt. But, yeah, that's absolutely crazy. And I wonder if things like this are ever taught in school. Because when growing up, I never heard anything about this study or what happened and what the government did. Maybe today, but I didn't hear anything about this in my school. And I grew up in the South, so.
Oh, yeah. Most of these things aren't all that widely popular, whatever discussed broadly. The Texas City explosion, 1947, 600 dead. Who's heard of that today? Tuskegee syphilis, same thing. Nuclear testing in the Southwest, yeah, that's not taught very much in school.
Yeah, and it should be. I mean, actual, real history should be talked about, and instead we're making stuff up, or we're deleting the parts that we don't like and adding other parts. So, and that was mostly under the Obama administration, in my opinion. So. Let's talk about a more recent one, and I think people have heard about this one and probably don't know all the ins and outs of it. Can you talk about what happened, what started really, Ruby Ridge?
Ruby Ridge was the tragedy of the Weaver family. You had Randy Weaver, his wife Vicki, and several children, and they had decided to essentially withdraw from the world. Some people marched to beat of a different drummer. They marched a whole different brass band. And so they retired to a place in northern Idaho, fairly isolated, but there was a town store about 2 miles away and a small town about 5 miles. So they weren't totally off in the interwoods. And essentially they were minding their own business. They may have been a little eccentric, but that was their business, nobody else's. And the government, specifically the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, decided to need an informant to infiltrate some white nationalist groups up there. So they approached Randy Weaver, and he said no. Well, the government has a way to deal with people who don't want to be informants. You set them up and then tell them you can go to prison or become an informant. Take your pick. So knowing that the Weaver family was extremely cash poor, Randy Weaver attempted to sell a couple of his shotguns to a guy who turned out to be another ATF informant. And the informant told him he would pay like twice or three times their value, but only if the barrels were cut down to about 12 inches. That made them illegal sawed-off shotguns. Randy Weaver cut down the barrels, sold them, and ATF grabbed him. He was released on bail and retired to his cabin that he built with his family and decided he wasn't going to come out and surrender. Then there were some screw-ups, like they issued a warrant for his arrest because he didn't show up for hearing, of which he'd been given no notice. Anyway, he hears about the warrant. He's not coming out. Bottom line, what do you do in this situation? And the answer is leave him alone. He's not hurting anyone. Sooner or later, we'll pick him up on a traffic stop or something like that. So just wait. It didn't work out like that. They went to the U.S. Marshals Service, which started building this gigantic picture of Randy Weaver as some sort of Rambo Superman, holed up desperately in a cabin. So they hatched this whole enormous plan to capture him, including hiring a military aircraft to fly over and do photo recon of this little cabin sitting out in the middle of nowhere. Wow. Then they sent some agents in to reconnoiter. It led to a confused gunfight. Apparently what happened was the Weaver dogs started barking at the marshals. The Weavers thought that might be game. They could really use deer, or better yet, a bear with winter coming on.
Right.
So they went down to see what the dogs had cornered, and the answer was the marshals. And the Weaver boy, Sammy Weaver, 14 years old, came across them first. And what happened, the best reconstruction is one of the agents shot the dog. The 14-year-old kid who's just seen his dog shot in front of his eyes by a stranger, he doesn't know these guys are marshals, shoots at the marshal, misses. The marshal shoots him, wounds him. He turns to run away, and another marshal shoots him in the back.
Gosh.
Then he goes down, and Randy Weaver's nowhere near this. He can't even see what's going on. One of the marshals is shot by Randy Weaver's companion, and he's killed. So you've got 2 dead already. From that point on, everything blew up because now it became this Rambo, who I might add hadn't even fired a shot, but this Rambo who has killed a federal agent. They bring an FBI hostage rescue team, which surrounds the place. They give a totally illegal order, which is, understand, the people in the cabin don't know they've been surrounded by snipers. As far as they're concerned, the government vanished. But the order is, if you see a male outside the building with a gun, shoot him on sight. The orders were, you can and should shoot him. So you've got a bunch of people who don't even know there are police around, and the police have been ordered to kill them without, threatening them, calling out we're police or anything.
Unbelievable.
Weaver and his friend go outside the house at one point, and a sniper fires on them, hits Randy Weaver in the arm. Weaver and the friend and their daughter go sprinting back to the house. His wife opens the door, holding a baby in her arms. With her spare hand, she opens the door. Okay, the sniper's off to the side, so he actually has to shoot through the door to hit anybody running toward it, and he takes a shot. The shot doesn't hit either of the people running toward the house. It misses Weaver in the neck and basically blows her neck and a part of her head out. A 7.62 round will do that sort of thing. So she collapses and bleeds to death right there. So now we've got a 14-year-old and a mother killed, plus a federal agent. And they surround the place for a while and make various threats and that sort of thing. And eventually the Weavers give up. And the case goes to trial, and the government asks for the death penalty. And the jury found the 2 people on trial, Weaver and his friend, innocent of everything except they convicted Weaver on failure to appear on the original court charge. And he got a few months in prison for that. I mean, that's the end of it.
Unbelievable.
A whole bunch of people dead, and, jury says nobody's guilty.
Well, and it seems like in that whole thing that he was set up by an informant. I mean, it's you're entrapped basically when you say I want a rifle from you or I want a shotgun from you. If he had given it to them and sawed it off in violation of the law, that's one thing. But when you tell the guy, hey, I want it at this certain length, when you know it's a violation because you want to see if he's going to do it, to me that's entrapment. I mean, what really ticked them off about this guy? I mean, what really was it about, do you think?
I think it was, first of all, he wouldn't cooperate. He wouldn't do what they wanted. They wanted him to be an informant. No, I'm not going to. They wanted him to show up for a hearing. No, I'm not going to. And at the end, he winds up out there defying them. I mean, you can show that the big push from the marshals increased after a newspaper ran a story about him on a theme of basically Randy Weaver is standing off the federal government. That was it. Okay, he's defying our agency. We got to do something about this guy.
Yeah, and it almost seems like from the very beginning they didn't like him because he went off the grid. I mean, seriously, when you look at it, it's like, oh, okay, so you're going to go off the grid. What are you doing? We're going to need to watch you because you're not acting, quote unquote, normally. I mean, was there anything like that? Do you think? I mean, that's the impression.
It was probably a factor, but they weren't stupid enough to put it in writing. Let's put it that way.
Which is odd. I'm surprised, but yeah, no, I agree with you. I just think that was like their first. It aroused suspicion, and then, like you said, when they couldn't use him after that, then it was kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to come and get you. I mean, it's and it's so tragic that all of these people died like that. And in your book, you even talk about too, like the daughter. Because they were holed up for so long, that she would crawl back and forth to the kitchen to get food and have to wade through her mother's own blood to get through the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the while fearful of sticking her head up. She's crawling along the floor because, there are snipers out there. They've already killed one person.
Yeah, killed
her
mother.
So don't stick your head up.
Yeah, that whole thing was just absolutely crazy. But, do you see any similarities at all to that case and the Bundy case in Nevada in some aspects?
There are some. I haven't studied the Bundy case in great detail. Mm-hmm. But, you can see some of the same thing. Agencies do not like you to defy them, and they're perfectly willing to use a lot of force to make sure you don't do that.
Yeah, and I just think, too, that there's a lot of incidences where when this one turned out in the Bundy one, when he, and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry that I don't remember his name right now, but when he came out of the car and they just opened fire on him, and there's so much discrepancy of whether he really had a gun, whether he didn't, whether he was firing on them. It just seems like that whole thing with the Bundy case could have been done a lot differently and saved a lot of lives, because they weren't killing people. They weren't in their cabin killing people, what they had taken over. They weren't doing any of that. So, but the government's not liable, right? Yep.
The funny part is, having worked in interior, I can tell you something about the building they were in. You notice it's about 18 million miles from no place. It's a small, basically, residence. So why are you keeping an empty residence out there? And I think the answer is right near some large bodies of water that probably held waterfowl during the migration. And so what you have is, and this is typical of how much money the government has, you build a house out there so that when your people come in, the biologists come in to do wildlife census for, a couple of weeks out of the year, they'll have a place to live. And the other 50 weeks of the year, it's empty. So they could have occupied that as a protest, and unless they sent out press releases, nobody in the government might have known that it was occupied for nearly another year.
Wow.
They show up and, hey, somebody's in the house.
Yeah, let's go in. let's go get everybody. I know. It's tragic, loss of life there, and I don't know if they look at the Bundy case, if they would ever do anything differently. I don't know what would be the incentive to do anything different. If you're the government, you have no liability and things like that. Why would you do anything different?
Sure. That's the lesson the government draws.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you dang well please. In fact, the way the law is set up, it's perverse in that if you try to promote safety on the part of the government, you're legally at risk. If you don't try to promote safety, you're almost totally protected against lawsuits. It's insane.
That is insane. Very much insane. Now let's talk a little bit about Waco. What sent law enforcement out there in the first place in Waco?
Well, we can talk about the official reason and the real reason.
Yes.
The official reason was that they thought the Davidians might have an illegal machine gun and an illegal rifle of greater than 50 caliber. But it was so flimsy. You read the search warrant and going, what the heck? This is many pages, but what does it really say? The proof they have an illegal machine gun is someone heard machine gun fire from the vicinity of their house. Okay, well, they're out in the Tule Woods. Owning machine guns in Texas is legal so long as you jump through the proper hoops.
Right.
So it could have been anybody else in the entire county shooting in the open ground near the Davidian house. The greater than 50 caliber rifle, the witness who talked to the agent said it was a 50 caliber, which is an ordinary firearm. But he claimed no. On his expertise, he recognized it was an obscure British 52 caliber firearm from World War II. No, the first person was right. It was a standard 50 caliber. And the two guns, I might add, I'm familiar with them, they don't look anything like the same. I don't see how he could have had a description and say that, well, it was obvious from the description it was a 52. The 52 has a big magazine sticking out of the top. The 50 has a smaller one sticking out of the bottom. Things like that. But anyway, it was a trumped-up warrant.
Yeah.
The real reason, well, being a bureaucrat, when I first heard of the Waco raid going down, my first question was, when does their House appropriation cycle start? because all your little federal agencies, the world revolves around the first House Appropriations hearing, when you want your boss to be able to get there and say, typical of the difficult and dangerous work our agents do is some big case which is totally atypical of everything they do. Waco was going to be their case for this year. Their appropriation cycle started 10 days after the Waco raid. This was it. Grab all the headlines, seize the guns, put the guns out on a table, U.S. Attorney has a press conference. All of a sudden, you're on every national news channel just before Congress decides how much money you get. That's the real reason behind Waco.
Wow. And didn't there were people that were across the street up to the compound, and they were trying to become friends with the people there so they would open up to them. Can you talk a little bit about who they were pretending to be?
Oh, yes. It became known as the undercover house. The picture there, you've got this wide expanse where flat land, but you really, the nearest houses you can see are on the edge of the horizon. The one exception is across from the Davidian house was what became known as the undercover house, a duplex. And ATF put its agents in that duplex posing as community college students, which was totally absurd. I mean, they were middle-aged guys for the most part.
I mean,
but they claimed to be. Yeah.
How dumb can you be, you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, one interesting thing that I discovered, and it's shocking enough to where I put it up on a web page from thegovernment.com. The agents in the undercover house, well, to back up, the official reason why they had to have the first day's raid, which led to the gunfight that killed 10 people or so, the official reason given was the guys in the undercover house could not, apparently found that Koresh never went out. He was always in the house, so you're going to have to go in and root him out. You can't make a peaceful arrest. And besides, the guys in the undercover house barely knew what Koresh looked like. Well, what I found out was the report from the undercover agents in the undercover house, 9 days before the big bloody raid. They told what they did that day. They went shooting with David Koresh. No kidding. It's in their report.
Wow.
This guy that they could never get out of the compound,
yeah,
they went shooting with him. The man they supposedly didn't know what he looked like, they went shooting with him, and they had all the guns. He was carrying the ammunition.
And they could have taken him right there. Yeah.
Sure. The thing was, it wouldn't have generated national publicity if they just showed their badges and say, hey, we got a warrant for you. So they let him go back, and they went back, and they went back to planning the raid.
That's horrible. And now, how long did they hold everybody hostage there? I mean, it was a really long time.
Yep, 51 days.
Yeah.
And at the end, they staged this massive tear gas raid. Well, tear gas, it's actually CS gas, a powder, and flooded the building with it, and flooded the building with the CS was dissolved in, which is an industrial solvent, methylene chloride. I mean, they were spraying it in from the tanks. And in the end, a fire broke out. My suspicion is the fire was started by an FBI tear gas projectile of a type that is not supposed to be used on buildings because it will start a fire. You can use it in an open field, but not a building. Well, they got desperate, and I think they used it in a building. Yeah. And in the end, I forget now, 80-plus people died.
Yeah, I remember I wrote it down. 74 men and women and children were killed from the thing that I saw, but could have been 80. I mean, everybody just died. And why is it, do you think, in the end, when these people were dying, they didn't come out? Because I think you wrote about that in your book, why people didn't try to escape.
Well, the bulk, I think all of the children and the bulk of the women, women and children made up like 2/3 of the population, the people left in there. They were in a room known as the vault, which was in the center of the building. It was the only concrete structure in the gigantic wooden building. And they were under wet blankets to try to shield them from the tear gas. Well, in the last few minutes before the fire broke out, one of the FBI tanks penetrated right up to the front door of that vault and sprayed in an enormous load of CS gas mixed in methylene chloride. And the problem is methylene chloride is closely related to some of the modern anesthetics.
Right.
And it will conk you out. It will also jack up your carbon monoxide levels, which is not a good thing to have if you're about to be caught in a fire. Wow. And my theory is that they may have been unconscious when the fire broke out.
I mean, and who made the decision to do that? I mean, because I know I can understand the CS tear gas. I can understand that. You know, if you're doing that and that's acceptable and normal for places when you're trying to get people to come out. But who said that was okay to use that would knock them out and along with tear gas?
I don't think anybody specifically approved it. It was just done. I don't think anybody looked into the chemical consequences or anything like that. It was just, this is how we're going to do it. And the FBI assured Janet Reno that the CS would not harm children, but they didn't say anything about the methylene chloride. And in fact, I know they misled her, because when they said the CS won't harm children even in large quantities, they said there was a case of a child who was exposed to this much CS reported in the medical literature, and the child recovered without permanent effects. Well, I went back and read the article. It was more like the child nearly died. Wow. I forget how many weeks the child spent in the hospital, had to be put on a respirator, had a number of other things like that. It was, yeah, they nearly died, but it's true. If you nearly die but recover, then you have no lasting consequences. That doesn't mean it's safe.
Yeah, because as I've told people that listen to my show, I was a lawyer, practicing lawyer for a while. And before doing that, I went to the police academy. And part of what we had to do in training was to go walk through a room with CS tear gas and without your mask and everything else. And for most people, the effects of CS tear gas, your eyes water, your ears water, you're coughing, some people throw up. You know, it's a pretty severe type things that happen to you. And for me, I'm part of the 5% of the population it did absolutely nothing to, which is crazy. But yeah. I imagine with children, it's quite different with CS tear gas and could be potentially lethal.
Yeah, well, also, remember, you were being given a standard dose, I assume.
Yeah.
These people were being given like 10 or 100 times what the dose that would break trained troops. That's a standard. There's a certain dose that will break trained troops. They were given tens or hundreds of times that exposure.
Wow. And you also talk about in your book that it looked like that they really wanted the people inside there to die, or people have said that. Now, why is that?
Well, on that website, fromthegovernment.com, I have radio traffic from the FBI radio net during the fire. It was picked up by the recording unit in an airplane overflying the fire. And you hear the FBI agent at the scene in the M1 tank, calling for fire engines, increasingly desperate, calling for them. His boss, who is about a mile away at a checkpoint, has held up the fire engines.
Wow.
And you hear the guy at the scene scream. He's finally screaming, where are the fire engines? And his boss says, our people concentrated on the school bus area for the kids. Is that it? And the guy at the scene says, that's what we're trying to do. And his boss says, they're the only ones, I hope.
Wow.
Yeah. Watching people burn, and they're the only ones, I hope mode. Yeah, it was a bunch of cop killers. Let them burn.
Whew. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they had that in mind going in there, that they, had something against this. But, I mean, the whole idea, too, one of the ideas of going in there was because they thought that he was molesting the children or some allegations of sexual abuse of the children. Mm-hmm. And here they go in and they kill the children. It's one of those things makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, we had to kill the children in order to save them. Yes,
yeah.
I think we've heard that before.
Yeah, that's really goes along with the name of your book.
Yeah, and the strange part is I've also got 911 tapes of David Koresh during the firefight, calling them up. this guy's supposed to be anti-government fanatic. No,
Right.
he's calling him up, and his first words are, what was it? It was, hey, we're being shot up out here. Now, there's my people dead and there's your people dead, and it's all your fault. You know, he doesn't view this as some wonderful opportunity. It's something that happened that was outrageous, and he's saying, you started it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Janet Reno actually did have a special counsel appointed to investigate everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, John Danforth. As is usual, he had his omnipotent peons also. They were mostly government investigators and attorneys that he hired to work for him, and so they came up with a report that covered up everything. I mean, it was a cover-up of a cover-up and cost quite a few $1 million, as I recall. In the end, they said basically no government official did anything that's worth pursuing, and they actually mentioned my allegations of perjury, where, I had affidavits which, in light of what we discovered since, would plainly involve perjury. But that's not worth going after. The one guy they did go after was the government employee, the assistant U.S. attorney, who allowed Mike McNulty and I to find the evidence. Because he was an honest guy and honestly thought, I've got nothing to hide. Here's the evidence.
Wow.
They set him up on a claim that he had failed to turn over one page of notes to the grand jury. They convicted him on perjury, tried to get him disbarred. Fortunately, the Texas bar told them to get bent, and he was the only guy that went after. He was the only man who'd done the unforgivable thing of embarrassing his own agency.
I mean, this sounds eerily familiar to another special counsel that has been appointed. That, and I'm not saying he's doing any wrongdoing, but there's so many things surrounding, so many conflicts of interest and everything else surrounding the special counsel that we have presently.
Yes.
You know, and I can only imagine what's going to come out of here, and who we're protecting in this investigation with Robert Mueller right now. So that'll be interesting.
I'm sure nothing improper will happen. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that'll be your fifth or sixth book. You've written 5 so far. Is this 6 or 7 that will be coming out?
5. This is my number 5. So
Okay.
I'm from the government, and I'm here to kill you.
So you'll get ready to do that 6th book with Robert Mueller, because I think you're going to have to do that. And the cost of the investigation under Janet Reno, in your book, you talk about it was like $17 million, which then was, probably cheap. I can only imagine what the current investigation is going to come out to be, and we haven't even we have no idea to know anything about what that's going to cost or has cost already. So,
the current investigation, I was struck by something, which is, first of all, the number of attorneys that he hired on a far narrower issue. But secondly, the whole rationale of an independent counsel is we cannot investigate this in using our regular government employees because they'd have conflicts of interest or that sort of thing. Look at the list of attorneys he's hired. Over half of them are government employees, given a special detail for this. Well, wait a minute. If you could find government employees who could do it impartially, then you should have held the investigation in-house.
Right, and those are also Hillary Clinton donors, most of them, or a lot of them.
Yes.
Are. I mean,
yes, you noticed.
Yeah, and the whole thing stinks, and the Republicans just remain quiet about it, and we just go on as if nothing is happening. And with all the connections that Robert Mueller had to Comey and to Obama and to Holder and on and on and on, and yet we're supposed to sit back and go, well, he's a neutral guy. He doesn't put politics in anything. We can trust him. I'm the government, and I'm here to help you, right? But I'm here to kill you, and I'm the government. And what is he not telling us? What's going on with it? I think there's going to be, and I'm serious about this, Dave. You probably will end up writing another book on it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, why in the heck don't they have guts enough to appoint an independent counsel on all these Russian allegations, about the Clinton administration tying into the Russian allegations, Russian collusion? Why doesn't they have guts enough to appoint an independent counsel on that? Then Mueller might be finding that he's on the receiving end of one of them.
Right, because he was involved with the transfer of the uranium, from what I understand. I'm not saying he's guilty of anything, but he did have a hand in it. And I guess the big question is, would he recuse himself of being special counsel for something like that? And again, what is he coming up with and running into right now that he possibly could be covering up? And I can say that illegally or legally, that he's covering up and not pursuing because of the fact that of his involvement or somebody else's involvement. I mean, somebody needs to step in and put a halt to all this and get it going in the right direction and start firing some people. But it doesn't seem like that's what we're going to do.
No, I doubt it. You're trying to drain the swamp and you hired a swamp creature to help you.
Exactly. Yeah, sure. And the people who are in the swamp hired the swamp creature to help you. So that, now you talk about in your book, I'm from the government and I'm here to kill you, about the FBI and how well do they deal with terrorism, do you think?
It was laughable. The point I develop in that chapter is that always the government agencies are, we could protect you, but we need more power. We need more information. We need to monitor your emails. And the answer is that prior to 9/11, there were plenty of signs of what was coming, but they were drowned out by all the noise. Information was being received that had nothing to do with what was coming. The agents in Phoenix were reporting suspicious guys are taking aircraft flying lessons, and they don't seem to be interested in the takeoff or landing portion, just in the flying. And they have no logical reason to want to be trained on a commercial aircraft. I mean, these are not guys who are looking forward to becoming pilots. Let's look into them. And they were ignored. And what about taking out any reference to Muslims or Islam in the FBI training manuals? I mean, let's kind of pretend there aren't terrorists out there. We'll just take it out of the manuals and we won't even talk about it, which is crazy. Yeah. Well, we could equalize things and talk about all the Methodist terrorism and the Lutheran terrorism and Eastern Orthodox terrorism. That's a big problem.
Well, and the whole thing is amazing, and it if you want to see, I think, in a way, maybe how the FBI kind of handles things, look at Las Vegas. I mean, in your opinion, I've done articles on this. I've done some research. There are at least 3 or 4 experts who say, hey, we think this is ISIS connected. And yet the FBI at the very beginning said, nope, not ISIS, no outside organization. We're done here. Let's move along. Nothing to see.
Yeah, that struck me right off the top. That usually with a high-profile incident, FBI will immediately come out with a linkage. It's usually linkage to people who had nothing to do with it or a person who had nothing to do with it. But this time it was right off the top. No, we can rule out one cause. Well, wait a minute. You barely know anything about the guy.
Yeah, I know.
How can you rule out anything?
And we're not talking about it at all. And I had an earlier show today, and I was just reading that there was an alleged plot to blow up a shopping mall in South Florida, and that was foiled by the FBI, and they arrested the guy. And he turns out he was from Miami. Now, this person, they were right away willing to say he was an ISIS sympathizer and, a lone wolf. And yet, here we have this guy. When I said, at least 4 experts have said, look, ISIS came out and said, this guy did it. We've got other things that point to the fact that he was working with ISIS. And yet, nothing. Silent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
there's another book for you.
Yeah, oh, yes.
But I wanted to ask you also, in your book you talk about, I thought this was hilarious in a very sad way, when you talk about air marshals and when they were first started and the requirements. Can you talk about the requirements of the air marshals?
Oh, yeah. When they started out, the project was put air marshals on the airplanes with suitable firearms and, above all else, suitable projectiles so that they'll go undercover and the terrorist won't know, is there an air marshal on this plane or not? And they'll be able to jump him when he's distracted. Well, then they came in with dress codes. You have to have short hair, no facial hair, and wear a suit and jacket. Well, wait a minute. Flying between Washington and New York City, guys in suits and jackets don't stand out. Flying between Tucson and Dallas, yeah, they stand out. and then they had to check in separately ahead of time. So all you had to do was watch and see if a guy in a suit coat checked in and was boarded the plane ahead of anybody else. And you'd know there was an air marshal there. Why? Well, I think the real motive was security theater, not security. If you actually had undercover guys on the plane, undetectable, then granted they would give you the best protection, but people wouldn't know it. You want the publicity. So instead you do things that make them stand out, even though that undermines your supposed mission.
Yeah, it makes them a target, unfortunately. Probably
Sure.
not intentionally, but it makes them a target because people can see who the air marshal is and they know who to target, who to take out first if need be.
Yeah, sure. And better yet, they can spot if there wasn't an air marshal on this plane. Now we got a free field of fire.
Unbelievable. Let's talk a little bit about the Arizona border, and probably you're familiar with that. What is going on with the Arizona border? How bad is it right now?
At the moment, it's slacked off some, but most of the time, you don't want to get near the border unless you're heavily armed and preferably more than one of you. It's and you sure as heck wouldn't want to be out there overnight. Essentially, it's almost porous. It's swamped. When they talk about building a wall as opposed to doing anything else, I can tell you in one court case recently, I heard a Border Patrol guy testifying here that over the time period in question, which was a few years ago, on a slow day they would make hundreds of arrests just in the Tucson sector. On a busy day, they would make thousands. So you have the situation where we have 6 federal judges down here, and you have hundreds or thousands of cases coming in a day. They don't even have deportation proceedings. Sometimes you'll see in newspapers, this guy was deported 3 times before. He probably wasn't. Deportation proceeding means you have a court hearing, he's held, et cetera, et cetera. What they do with the vast bulk of them is just drive them back to the border, have them sign a document that swears they won't do it again, which they will,
Right.
and let them walk to the other side of the border. So they never see court at all.
That's
And
unbelievable.
of course, they're free to try tomorrow night. Because the people smugglers, they have a whole system, which is you don't pay in advance. You pay only after we get you to the U.S. Then we hold you in a safe house, and we impound all of your money and everything else so you can't leave. And after your relatives or other friends send us the standard, then was $1,500, we'll release you and put you on a car for your eventual destination. But since you don't pay up front, if you get caught today, you come back tomorrow.
It's just unbelievable. And I know that there's so much more that we could talk about the border, but unfortunately this hour has absolutely flown by, and as it often does when we get into some really good subjects. Dave Hardy, author of I'm from the Government and I'm Here to Kill You, The True Human Cost of Official Negligence. That your book is on Amazon, and it can also be found at fromthegovernment.com. And I'm hoping everybody will go there and check it out and also buy your book. There's a lot more that we didn't even get to talk about and a lot more details even on the things that we did talk about. But, Dave, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your taking the time to come here and talk to us about it.
Oh, sure. I was happy to be here.
Well, and I tell you, as talking today, we've found 2 more books that you're going to need to write, because I think this information, is going to need to come out. I think that there's a lot of things that the general public is not being told. And, we need people like you who can go and do the research and really get to the bottom of things, because, for example, like in Vegas, I really don't think that we're going to get to hear the truth for a very long period of time, or so it seems.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, so, hopefully we can get something out there in book form pretty soon, and you can do the research probably and get it out there before the FBI even gets it out. So,
it'll take them years.
It'll take them years, but again, Dave Hardy, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Have
take
a good
care.
day.
You too. So please do go out and get his book, because there was a lot in there we didn't even get a chance to talk to. Tons of information. Even the things that we talked about, there's so much more detail in there, I think, that you need to know. Very interesting book, very interesting aspects about our government. I know a lot of us suspect those things about the FBI and about our government in general, but he's got all the information listed there, and kind of hard to look at the facts and not believe the facts. So anyway, again, his book, I'm from the Government and I'm Here to Kill You, The True Human Cost of Official Negligence. Go out and buy it. Until next time, God bless you. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you again next week with another great guest. Take care.